CBSN Originals, breakthrough documentaries, streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
Breaking news streaming all day long.
And always just a click away.
The highest quality journalism
that explains not just who or what or where,
but why.
CBS News. This is why.
The Biden administration is trying to use both incentives and its authority to get more of the country vaccinated.
We all want our lives to get back to normal. And fully vaccinated workplaces will make that happen more quickly and more successfully. We all know that in our gut. With incentives and mandates, we can make a huge difference and save a lot of lives.
President Biden is asking federal employees and contractors to show proof of their vaccination. If not, they'll have to wear a mask on the job and take a COVID test at least once a week. He's also directing the Pentagon to look into adding the COVID vaccine to its required list. Mr. Biden is trying to encourage more vaccinations for those not on the government payroll, too. Small and medium-sized businesses will be reimbursed for giving time off for workers to get vaccinated. The COVID relief plan will also fund state or local government programs to pay people $100 to get the shot. Earlier, I spoke with immunotherapy scientist Dr. Leo Nisola for his reaction to the moves.
First, let's just acknowledge that this is a very difficult moment. I particularly did not anticipate that we were going to face so much hesitancy around a life-saving vaccine in the middle of a pandemic with a deadly variant out there. So I think President Biden touched a very important point, which is maintaining public safety. And honestly, today, how would you go about your life without the assurance that people around you in public spaces are fully vaccinated? We still don't have vaccine passports or a way of ensuring that people that are around you in a bus, in an airplane, in a hotel lobby, or even in your local grocery store, if they are carrying the virus, if they are vaccinated, or if they are anti-vaxxers and fully unvaccinated. I also think that we can't wait any longer. So I liked to see President Biden taking this approach of head-on addressing the issues, being clear on the messaging. I think the CDC has a little bit of a challenge, has had a little bit of a challenge with the messaging around vaccine and what the vaccinated individuals can do and what the unvaccinated individuals should do. And I think the message today was pretty clear. It couldn't get anything clearer than that. That said, I think mandates are very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Doctor.
I think mandates are very complicated, especially for someone that works in the healthcare space like I do. But still, when we have a deadly virus with a variant that has already taken that many lives and has taken our civil liberties, it's very complicated to wait a little bit longer for folks to get on board. Now, the science is clear. There is no scientific reason not to get vaccinated. So I would expect that as soon as the FDA approval comes, mandates should come. Moreover, we should also talk about what President Biden mentioned about the private sector, which I agree. I think we should pressure the private sector to be enforcing vaccination proof and enforcing mask mandates in their venues as long as there is the danger of the unvaccinated out there.
So, Doctor, you mentioned having that full FDA approval of those Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. At this point, what additional actions do you think would encourage more people to get vaccinated?
I think the full confidence of the agency on the efficacy and the safety of both Moderna and Pfizer's vaccine, it's a great first step. I think before we think about mandating vaccines for everyone, we should be able to approve them. Moreover, I think also it's important for us to hold accountable those who are spreading misinformation online. I think before COVID, in a pre-COVID world, we had to address vaccine hesitancy and treatment hesitancy in a one-on-one approach by showing data, by showing science, and speaking to people in the way that they understand. Now, with the online campaigns against a vaccine, anti-science, it's very hard for this to be done in a one-on-one level. So I would expect that these online platforms that are spreading these messages on behalf of those users could get a fine or some sort of accountability, because these posts are live. If you do a quick Facebook search, you would find a lot of vaccine misinformation still today.
Right, it's an ongoing problem we've continued to see manifest itself throughout the pandemic. Dr. Leo Nisola, doctor, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
A combination of the Delta variant and a low vaccination rate is fueling a surge of COVID cases in Alabama. Alabama is the least vaccinated state in the country. Just 34% of its total population is fully inoculated. On Wednesday, the state's Department of Health reported an average of more than 1,900 new infections per day. Hospitalizations are also rising. According to AL.com, Alabama's third COVID wave is officially its second biggest and getting bigger. Ramsey Archibald joins me now with more on his reporting. He's a data reporter for AL.com. Ramsey, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So Alabama saw high case counts last summer and over the winter. Can you put this current wave into context for us?
Sure. So, like you said, the case counts now are higher than they were in July of last year. That was the first real surge we saw in Alabama was last July. And at the time, we thought it was a 4th of July spike. And we're sort of operating under the same assumptions now, except for cases are higher now than they were then. Today, they crossed the 7-day average for new cases, crossed 2,000 for the first time since February of this year. And cases this winter were still much higher than they are now. So we're not quite to that level yet, but the ascension, so the curve is very sharp right now. So we're seeing really fast increases in case counts.
Yeah, we see how steep that curve is. We saw that in that graphic a moment ago. Ramsey, what do we know about the patients who are currently hospitalized?
So we have quite a few patients hospitalized. I think the last number was over 1,200, which again is not quite as high as it was this winter, but it's still very high. And we're seeing the average age of patients hospitalized with COVID-19 in Alabama get younger. So whereas last winter, I think the average age was about 65 years old, that has come down now to about 55 years old for the average COVID-19 patient in Alabama. And there's a couple of reasons for that. For one thing, even though Alabama has very low vaccination rates, the people who are most likely to be vaccinated in Alabama are older people. So 65 and older they have much higher vaccination rates than the rest of the state, that's part of the reason we're seeing that age come down, but also because Delta is just so transmissible and people in Alabama are living life as if there's no coronavirus right now.
Well, what challenges, you touched on it there, what challenges are local health officials reporting as they try to care for an increasing number of patients?
One of the biggest challenges we've seen is trying to convince people to get the vaccine. And there is some good news on that front. Just in the last week, we've seen an uptick in people initiating a vaccine series. So getting that first shot, really the first uptick we've seen since the very early stages of the rollout. It's still not great numbers, still last in the nation, as you mentioned, but that is a good sign. And there's been a lot of misinformation about the vaccine, and then there's distrust about masking and mask mandates. So there's a lot of trouble getting the message out to people.
Yeah, and it was really interesting because against that backdrop, we saw Republican Governor Kay Ivey with some pretty forceful words for the unvaccinated. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
COVID-19 virus is being driven by the unvaccinated. My message remains clear and simple. Everybody in Alabama ought to get the vaccine, ought to get it.
So, I mean, you pretty much answer this. The vaccination rate, you said, has picked up just a bit for those looking for that first dose. Is it clear, why? Do we have any sense? And is it misinformation primarily as to why the state ranks last in the country?
I can't say for sure whether, Kay Ivey's comments or what spurred this latest increase. I think likely it has something to do with the rising cases, right? So if most of the spring cases were down, so people thought, oh, I don't need to get it. There's no pressing concern right now. And that has clearly changed in the last month. We've also seen a big push, not only from Kay Ivey, but from other lawmakers in Alabama. Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville came out with a pro-vaccine stance within the last couple of weeks. And that's been pretty common lately here. Misinformation is definitely plays a part in why people, I think, aren't getting it. You can just read my email inbox if you want some of that. But I don't think it's the only reason. I think there's obviously a lot of real concern about the safety of these vaccines for a lot of people. And I think the lack of overall healthcare in Alabama. So a lot of people here don't have a regular doctor that they would go see and can ask these questions to. So I think getting people the information they need from a trusted source will be really key going forward.
No, that's a really important bit of context, Ramsey, because I think, for people in other parts of the country who do see a primary care physician on a somewhat regular basis, that may not be something that factors into their understanding of why it is other people would choose not to get that vaccine. If you don't have someone who's trusted in the medical profession to ask, then you can see how perhaps misinformation might persist. All right, Ramsey Archibald, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Florida's Gulf Coast is being hit by what's known as a red tide, a toxic algae bloom that kills fish and makes it hard for humans to breathe. The algae stretches roughly 100 miles along the state's western coastline. It's hurting businesses during the summer tourism season. Ben Tracy spoke with a local fisherman about the effects.
Tyler Capella took us out on Tampa Bay to see what he calls his nightmare.
Gnarly.
Oh man, that's nasty.
Dead fish everywhere.
Oh man, this just goes forever.
Killed by a red tide, a massive algae bloom that has turned Tampa Bay toxic.
As a fisherman, what's it like to see this?
Oh man, it's devastating. My worst fears have come true.
Capella runs a fishing charter business and is documenting the fish kill to pressure elected officials to help. He even covered himself in dead fish.
Do I have your attention now?
What's the worst you've seen?
Dead fish as far as you could see in every direction. I mean, big ones, small ones. It looked like a bomb had gone off.
Red tides do naturally occur off the coast of Florida, but scientists say they're now happening more frequently, and humans are making them worse.
Warming ocean temperatures due to climate change may lead to more red tides, and this spring more than 200 million gallons of polluted water from an old phosphate plant was dumped in the bay, which could have made this red tide worse. It now stretches for about 100 miles of the Florida Gulf Coast and had moved right into Tampa Bay.
Now that is very unusual.
Michael Crosby studies red tides at Sarasota's Marine Laboratory.
It becomes very difficult for it to get back out again because of the tidal sloshing back and forth.
Tyler Capella worries he's running out of time.
Are you worried about your livelihood?
Oh, 100%. My fear is that this entire region has potential to become a dead zone.
Ben Tracy, CBS News, Tampa Bay.
That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
original documentary on CBSN.
Society is deeply uncomfortable with a woman holding power.
For women, corporate America has been an uphill battle.
You're emotional, you're harsh, you're cold.
And it still is.
That's when I realized womanness was at a disadvantage for me.
Women of color sit at the painful intersection of race and gender discrimination.
You put in the work, and you're ultimately not the one who gets credit for it.
Many professional women had to make a decision between employment and caregiving.
Gender discrimination is the one thing that has transcended time and race and religion. It is literally written into the Bible.
Women in the Workplace, the unfinished fight for equality. Download the free CBS News app to watch.
The world's largest rainforest is on fire.
This is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
You can say what you like.
How far are you willing to go to ensure QAnon prevails?
To the ends of the earth.
For the rest of my life.
The Christian right, they're not advocating for everybody's religious liberties. They're advocating for theirs.
CBSN Originals. Stories that challenge what you know.
Do you see any room for gun legislation?
No.
Take you deeper.
Why do people deny science?
And broaden your understanding of our world.
Where would you be now if the judge looking at the photos made the same mistake that the artificial intelligence did?
I'd be in prison right now.
CBSN Originals. Breakthrough documentaries. Streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thank you so much for joining me. The Biden administration is hoping to get more Americans vaccinated against COVID-19 with a series of new measures. On Thursday, President Biden announced federal workers and contractors will now need to show proof of their vaccination status. Those who do not get the shot will be subject to new testing, masking, and social distancing requirements. The measures come as officials race to curb the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant and the rise of misinformation. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang starts off our coverage.
Today, President Biden called out vaccine holdouts and pleaded with them to change their minds.
If, in fact, you're unvaccinated, you present a problem to yourself, to your family, and to those with whom you work.
The Delta variant is driving the latest deadly surge, and so are the 100 million people who are eligible but remain unvaccinated.
Too many people are dying.
To reverse the trend, the president touted new incentives, like urging states to offer $100 to every newly vaccinated American.
I know the paying people to get vaccinated might sound unfair to folks who've gotten vaccinated already. But here's the deal. If incentives help us beat this virus, I believe we should use them.
He also announced that all civilian federal employees, plus contractors, will have to get vaccinated or get tested for COVID-19 weekly or twice a week. They'll be required to wear a mask, social distance, and might have official travel restricted. President Biden also directed the Defense Department to look into requiring vaccines for all service members. States like New York and California, along with a growing number of the country's biggest companies like Facebook, Google, and BlackRock, are taking matters into their own hands, requiring vaccination in order to return to work. More than 600 colleges are also mandating them for at least some students or employees. But young people are also among the most hesitant. A prominent pro-Trump youth group is fueling the fears over the vaccine.
We are not going to tolerate students to be forced to get the vaccine against their will.
The president said it's time to cut through the misinformation.
The vaccine was developed and authorized under a Republican administration, and it's been distributed and administered under a Democratic administration. Look, this is not about red states and blue states.
Weijia Jiang joins me now from the White House for more. Weijia, how quickly are these requirements going to go into effect?
I just spoke to a White House official about this, and they are in effect immediately. The problem is, of course, that these agencies still have to establish programs and plans to get people vaccinated and or tested if they choose not to. And so they will have what officials are currently calling a reasonable amount of time to get those details into place. But so far, we don't know exactly what that means because, again, they just announced the policy. And frankly, I think, they put this together very quickly. And so they don't have a specific time frame. But to your question, the rules are in effect right away.
Okay. And aside from these new requirements, just in terms of the message, the president has delivered similar remarks before. What sparked Thursday's address?
Well, he made very clear that we are dealing with something very different because the Delta variant is powerful, it's growing in power, and the difference is that it is highly contagious among the unvaccinated, unlike other strains. And so that is one reason why we are seeing this push not only for federal workers, but he is encouraging the private sector to follow suit as well, because as Dr. Walensky of the CDC said earlier this week, if this virus continues to spread out of control, the biggest fear is that it will continue to mutate and it will become so powerful that it will break through the vaccine. So even those people who are vaccinated will not have protection, at least not the same amount of protection they have right now. And that's why they're really, pushing for the unvaccinated to change their minds.
One of the things, though, Weijia, that critics have said in falling short of mandates is that things like a federal requirement might create backlash and even more opposition to the COVID vaccine. As you know, it's already become politicized. So how is the White House weighing that concern against its concerns about protecting public health?
Well, I think that's exactly why the White House and the president today stressed that this is a choice. It is not a mandate, and those federal workers who don't want to get a vaccine have options. They can get tested regularly. They can wear a mask all the time. They can have their travel possibly be restricted. They have to social distance. And so the point here is that they are not, tying somebody down and saying you have to get the shot, which I think when people heard the word mandate initially, that's what they assumed would be the case, and it's not that. And so the president said today in very stark terms that, people who do not get vaccinated and still refuse to get the shot risk being hospitalized or worse. And so at the end of the day, we've heard many times from him and other officials that their biggest priority and biggest concern is saving lives.
Weijia, before I let you go, as you've been following, millions of American renters are in jeopardy now that a federal eviction moratorium is set to expire this weekend. The Biden administration says it's unable to extend the pandemic protections because of a Supreme Court decision last month. How else is the White House handling this?
So even ahead of this looming deadline, which is just days away now, at the end of last month, the White House announced several different measures that they were taking to try to help people who might face eviction. And they are calling on states to put protections into place. They announced several $1 billion of new grants that people could apply for. But really, it is up to Congress. So at this point, they are urging lawmakers on Capitol Hill to extend the federal moratorium on those evictions. But to your point, Lana, there's nothing that the president can do with executive action to do that. So it just depends on whether Congress decides to extend that date, which is July 31st.
All right, Weijia, thanks so much.
Sure.
President Biden says getting vaccinated against the coronavirus is a matter of life and death. His latest push to boost vaccinations comes as the Delta variant fuels a rise in cases across the U.S. More than 70% of Americans now live in counties with high or substantial transmission. Louisiana is one state where cases are skyrocketing, and an alarming number of those cases are kids. David Begnaud reports from New Orleans.
When you think about the COVID vaccine protecting the vulnerable, think about 5-year-old Dominic Albert.
Were you having trouble breathing?
Yes.
At this point, he's too young to be vaccinated. He contracted coronavirus, and that landed him in the emergency room.
Where do you think he may have gotten it?
Honestly, I don't know. I was taking every precaution to try to make sure that he does not get this.
School-age kids now make up the 3rd largest number of new COVID infections in Louisiana.
What's the lesson here?
Make sure to wear a mask, number one, at all times.
Disney is now mandating that masks be worn indoors at all U.S. theme parks. Some cities and states have brought back mask mandates, too.
People over the age of 2 must wear a mask indoors regardless of their vaccination status.
But there are holdouts. At least 5 states are resisting the call to mask up.
It's confusing. They're sending mixed messages constantly.
Back here in Louisiana, COVID hospitalizations have exploded from 259 on July 1st to more than 1,600 today. Children's Hospital New Orleans had 4 COVID patients on Monday of this week, and today they have 20.
How sick are they?
A lot of these kids are very sick with respiratory symptoms, literally starved for oxygen.
Jaquez Lee is a 17-year-old high school football player. We met him here in the emergency room.
What are you struggling with?
Breathing, major headaches, and coughing too.
Fatina Watkins is his mom.
It's hard to watch somebody struggling to breathe.
It's very hard. If he wouldn't have got the first dose of the vaccination, his sickness would be way worse than what it is now.
Both of the moms in our report are fully vaccinated. Jaquez is still in the hospital. He is still in the ICU, and that is him in the room behind me. He's been giving us thumbs up all day. He's in stable condition, and one of the nurses actually said recently, he's doing great. As for Dominic, the young boy we started our report with, he's already gone home. I asked what they treated him with, and the doctors said we treated him with a combination of albuterol and steroids, and after 36 hours, they discharged him. Lana?
Good to see them doing better, David. Thank you. Dr. Celine Gounder joins me now. She's an infectious disease specialist and epidemiologist at New York University School of Medicine and Bellevue Hospital. She's also the host of the Epidemic podcast and was on President Biden's transition task force for COVID-19. Thanks for being here. So the U.S. is now averaging roughly 513,000 coronavirus shots per day, and the pace of first doses is slowly increasing, but that's still a stark contrast to the 3 million shots that we were averaging back in April. Tell our viewers why it's so important that we get those numbers back up again, and what are the risks in not doing so?
Lana, I think the reason the Biden administration and many state and local governments are really doubling down on trying to get people vaccinated right now is because we have seen the emergence of this new Delta variant, which is more infectious, so it spreads more easily from person to person. And this Delta variant is also somewhat immune evading. So if you got a natural infection early in the pandemic, we cannot be sure that the immunity you had from that infection will protect you against the Delta variant. So it's really important at this time, if we're trying to prevent hospitalizations, deaths, if we're trying to prevent spread in the community, that we really put a damper on this by getting as many people vaccinated right now as possible.
Dr. Gounder, President Biden announced that federal workers will be asked to get vaccinated or face regular testing and other requirements. We've previously seen other companies doing the same, and for those requirements, we've seen upticks in vaccinations. What do you make of these requirements, and should they have been made sooner?
You know, I think of these federal requirements as really a requirement to be tested and to comply with other public health mitigation measures. It might be masking, it might be social distancing, it might be restrictions on your travel, and you get to be exempt. You get to graduate on to a more normal life if you get vaccinated. So really the mandate here is around testing, and the vaccination is your ticket to freedom out of that.
Right, but and that's what I said, that the announcement was that they would either face a vaccine requirement or face regular testing requirements. But when we have seen that implemented in other companies, we've seen vaccination rates among those employees increase substantially. And so I'm wondering if other companies should be doing the same, and if the administration should have been requesting it earlier.
Well, we're seeing a number of different local and state jurisdictions implementing something very similar. In fact, New York City was ahead of the curve on this, requiring this of all of their hospital and clinic workers first, then all of their city workers. New York State has followed suit, as are other states now. And I think the private sector, many companies have already made similar announcements. What you're seeing in the private sector, though, is more just straight up vaccination mandates. And I think that's because offering the option of ongoing testing to people who may not want to get vaccinated, well, that testing costs money. It's not logistically always so easy. And so that's an added burden, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. So I think the private sector, some of those smaller businesses in particular, may just say, you know what, it's just easier to require a vaccination. And if you're not interested, you could always opt to work elsewhere. As to whether the administration should have required this sooner, I think they were really hoping that the incentives, the carrots approach would be quite effective in getting people vaccinated, and we certainly made inroads that way. But I think they're having to take more of a sticks approach now of making it more burdensome to continue being unvaccinated.
Speaking of those carrots, the administration also announced that they'll be providing additional incentives to get people vaccinated, including expanding paid leave for shots and encouraging state and local governments to offer rewards for vaccinations. So what are you seeing as some of the major factors that are now still driving vaccine resistance, and how do we overcome those?
Well, you mentioned paid leave for workers. I think that's a really important point because workers don't want to lose wages to seek vaccination, and this expansion in paid leave allows them to take time off, not just to get vaccinated themselves, but to get family members vaccinated, to get their children vaccinated, and employers are reimbursed for giving workers that paid time off. So those are certainly barriers that remain. I think the other major barriers are around disinformation. Unfortunately, the social media companies have continued to allow that to spread. There's been much made of this disinformation dozen, the dozen or so people on Facebook who are responsible for about 65% of the disinformation about vaccines on Facebook. They are still on the platform, still spreading that disinformation. And finally, unfortunately, the pandemic and the vaccines have been politicized. And I think it's important to remember, as the president noted, that this was a vaccine that was developed under and in collaboration with a Republican administration, was approved or authorized rather under a Republican administration, and then has been distributed by a Democratic administration. So to me, that's really a bipartisan effort.
And Dr. Gounder, one last question for you. The U.S. recorded more than 86,000 new cases on Wednesday, and we understand that infections are likely to keep climbing before they fall. What can we do to stay safe while we watch officials working, and doctors like yourself, working to try and increase vaccinations?
Well, the CDC did recommend earlier this week that even fully vaccinated persons should return to masking indoors if you're in an area of high community transmission. And much of the country is still experiencing very high rates of community transmission, particularly in states in the Southeast. And so I think that is a reasonable measure. I think many of us are really fatigued, we're tired, we're exhausted, but we can have some return to normal life by doing things like socializing with people outdoors as much as possible and wearing those masks. But in the meantime, if you're vaccinated, that's wonderful, but try to encourage to the best you can others in your family, your friends, your community to get vaccinated as well.
Good action item for all of us. Dr. Celine Gounder, thank you for joining me, and thank you for all that you do.
My pleasure.
Coming up after the break, climate change may be driving sharks further north, why officials are warning beachgoers about the increased sightings. And 9 U.S. service members drowned during training last year. How their families are now pushing for change. This is CBSN. CBS News, always on.
An original documentary on CBSN.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
The highest quality journalism.
It explains not just who or what or where,
but why. CBS News. This is why.
The world's largest rainforest is on fire.
This is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
You can say what you like.
How far are you willing to go to ensure QAnon prevails?
To the ends of the earth.
For the rest of my life.
The Christian right, they're not advocating for everybody's religious liberties. They're advocating for theirs.
CBSN Originals. Stories that challenge what you know.
Do you see any room for gun legislation?
No.
Take you deeper.
Why do people deny science?
And broaden your understanding of our world.
Where would you be now if the judge looking at the photos made the same mistake that the artificial intelligence did?
I'd be in prison right now.
CBSN Originals. Breakthrough documentaries. Streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
Breaking news streaming all day long.
And always just a click away.
The highest quality journalism.
It explains not just who or what or where,
but why. CBS News. This is why.
75 million Americans are under heat advisories from Washington state to Florida. The heat index will hit 110 throughout parts of the South, with 112 expected in Mississippi. High temperatures are expected through the weekend, but should start to drop by Monday. There have also been some summer storms across the country. In Wisconsin, tornadoes and thunderstorms left more than 20,000 customers without power. Parts of the state recorded wind gusts of up to 78 miles per hour. The National Weather Service is still surveying the damage. The U.S. economy grew by 6.5% last quarter, according to a report released Thursday by the Department of Commerce. Officials believe vaccinations, government aid, and lifted coronavirus restrictions have helped. Although the nation's GDP has rebounded to pre-pandemic levels, economists say that it's still less growth than expected. Supply chain shortages and inflation have slowed down recovery efforts. Meanwhile, poverty rates are the lowest they've ever been as a result of federal pandemic aid, including stimulus checks, expanded unemployment insurance, and increased food stamps. However, most of these relief programs are expiring soon. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are moving ahead with a $1 trillion investment in our nation's infrastructure. It includes billions in new spending to upgrade roads, internet, drinking water, and more. But a multi-trillion-dollar Democratic proposal is creating uncertainty in the bill's future. Skylar Henry has the latest from Capitol Hill.
Republicans and Democrats agree a more than $500 billion investment in America's roads and bridges will grow the economy.
A massive investment in public infrastructure will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs. That's just what the doctor ordered.
Two-thirds of senators voted Wednesday to begin debate on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It invests $110 billion on America's roads and bridges. Almost the same amount would be spent on rail and public transit projects, and billions more would upgrade the country's broadband internet, airports, drinking water, and electrical grid.
At a time when Washington seems broken, this group of members behind me came together
along with others, and decided we were going to do something great for our country.
In addition to the physical infrastructure bill, Democrats are pushing ahead with a $3.5 trillion budget resolution, which they are trying to pass without Republican support.
We need to help American families keep up with the exorbitant costs of child care, health care, housing, college, and more.
But some moderate Democrats say they're uncomfortable with the price tag. Kirsten Sinema told the Arizona Republic that she supports many of the goals in the budget bill, but, quote, I have also made it clear that while I will support beginning this process, I do not support a bill that costs $3.5 trillion. That drew a swift rebuke from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who tweeted, good luck tanking your own party's investment on child care, climate action, and infrastructure while presuming you'll survive a 3-vote House margin. Progressive Democrats in the House say they will not vote for the infrastructure bill unless the Senate also passes the budget bill. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
A year ago, 9 U.S. service members drowned in a training accident, and now their families are taking steps to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again. David Martin explains.
These cell phone videos of doomed Marines crammed into an amphibious assault vehicle only last for seconds. They have no way of knowing that within hours, 9 will be dead, drowned when their vehicles sank off the coast of California. It's been a year, but at a press conference the families held today, their grief is still raw. Lance Corporal Chase Sweetwood was just 18.
Why is my son gone? Why was he not kept safe? He died the day before his 19th birthday.
The Marines had left the mothership in their tracked vehicle for a practice landing on San Clemente Island. Private First Class Brian Baltiera texted his father, our track started smoking.
It was the transmission.
Which was overheating?
Due to no transmission fluid in the vehicle.
The transmission failed, the engine quit, and the vehicle started taking on water. It took 45 minutes for help to arrive.
One of the boys who did survive did say, when I looked back, I saw Brian and his roommate praying.
The grief-stricken families today called on the Marine Corps not just assault vehicles back in the water until flaws they say make it a death trap are fixed. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick has been charged with sexually assaulting a 16-year-old boy. Massachusetts prosecutors say the assault happened in 1974, but McCarrick is reportedly not bound by the statute of limitations because he left the state and was never a resident. Pope Francis expelled McCarrick in 2019 after a Vatican investigation confirmed he had sexually molested adults as well as children. Prosecutors say McCarrick is the first cardinal in the U.S. to ever be criminally charged with a sexual crime against a minor. In Climate Watch, scientists say warming waters could be causing an increase in shark sightings along the northeast coast. Mola Lenke explains.
Sharks off New York's Atlantic coastline are causing concerns. Another sighting at the popular Jones Beach State Park on New York's Long Island this morning temporarily closed the waters to beachgoers.
They're not letting you go out at your waist and stuff like that, but I'm sure I'll be back in the water again.
Multiple sharks spotted about 20 yards off the coast closed a neighboring beach Wednesday.
Our guards spotted numerous, not just a singular, but numerous black-tip reef sharks. These are really unique sharks. They're more of a Caribbean shark. They're known to come close to the shoreline in feeding areas. So the concern is obviously with swimmers.
There have been several recent shark sightings along the New York coast. Scientists say that warming waters from climate change are driving the sharks north. Chris Paparo captured this video of sharks feeding on huge schools of fish off Southampton, New York. Paparo is with the South Fork Natural History Museum's shark research team, where they tag sharks in order to collect data on their patterns.
Climate change is definitely playing a role, especially in the sightings that we're seeing this year and last year. As sea temperatures are rising, a lot of fish populations are shifting north.
Now, experts stress the need to continue to learn about shark migration patterns and habitats, especially as they're now being impacted by climate change. Shark attacks are incredibly rare. We have to stress that. But officials say it is always important for beachgoers to remain vigilant out there. Lana?
Glad they're rare, Mola. Thank you. Coming up after the break, with the Delta variant continuing to spread, many remote workers are hesitant about returning to the office. How some employers are handling the return to work debate. Plus, Republicans are lining up to challenge Congresswoman Liz Cheney in the 2022 midterms. We'll take a look at how much influence former President Trump may have over next year's primary in Wyoming. You're streaming CBSN.
An original documentary on CBSN.
Society is deeply uncomfortable with a woman holding power.
For women, corporate America has been an uphill battle.
You're emotional, you're harsh, you're cold.
And it still is.
That's when I realized womanness was at a disadvantage for me.
Women of color sit at the painful intersection of race and gender discrimination.
You put in the work, and you're ultimately not the one who gets credit for it.
Many professional women had to make a decision between employment and caregiving.
Gender discrimination is the one thing that has transcended time and race and religion. It is literally written into the Bible.
Women in the Workplace, the unfinished fight for equality. Download the free CBS News app to watch.
The world's largest rainforest is on fire.
This is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
You can say what you like.
How far are you willing to go to ensure QAnon prevails?
To the ends of the earth.
For the rest of my life.
The Christian right, they're not advocating for everybody's religious liberties. They're advocating for theirs.
CBSN Originals. Stories that challenge what you know.
Do you see any room for gun legislation?
No.
Take you deeper.
Why do people deny science?
And broaden your understanding of our world.
Where would you be now if the judge looking at the photos made the same mistake that the artificial intelligence did?
I'd be in prison right now.
CBSN Originals. Breakthrough documentaries. Streaming free on CBSN and anytime on the CBS News app.
The first group of Afghans who worked with the U.S. military are arriving in the U.S. The Biden administration says so far nearly 2,500 people have been approved to enter the U.S. They'll stay at Fort Lee in Virginia until they finish medical exams and application processing. The evacuations are part of President Biden's promise to help Afghan interpreters, guides, and contractors, as well as their families. Many face threats from the Taliban for their work supporting U.S. troops. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is warning Iran that negotiations over its nuclear deal cannot go on indefinitely. Tensions have been rising over the stalled talks. Blinken spoke in Kuwait Thursday. He told reporters the U.S. is more than willing to continue negotiations, but, quote, the ball remains in Iran's court.
The fact of the matter is, it is Iran that has decisions to make, fundamental decisions to make about whether it, too, wants to return to compliance, and there is no amount of deflection that can change that basic fact.
Back in 2018, then President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal. Since then, the U.S. has been indirectly involved in reviving a deal that would relieve Iran from international sanctions. And in Lebanon, fires have killed at least one person, a 15-year-old boy who was helping firefighting efforts there. There's no official estimate of the acres burned, but wildfires in the north of the country have spread into Syria. Lebanon is asking neighboring Cyprus for help, which only days ago extinguished its worst brush fire in decades. Wyoming Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney is expected to face a primary challenge in the 2022 midterm elections. There are already several Wyoming GOP members who are being vetted to take Cheney's place as the state's only House representative. So far, all of them have been in talks with former President Trump. The Congresswoman has been at odds with Mr. Trump on a number of issues. Most notably, she voted to impeach him over his role in the January 6th Capitol attack. For more on this, I want to bring in Nick Reynolds. He is a politics and policy reporter for WYO File. Nick, thanks for being here. So how do voters and state representatives in Wyoming currently feel about Congresswoman Cheney?
Well, it's really difficult to say definitively. We don't really have a lot of good polling on this race yet, so it's kind of difficult to have a real scientific measure of where we actually sit right now. What we do know is almost every county Republican Party has voted to censure her, as well as the state party. But beyond messaging, the state party really doesn't have too much sway in the state. They don't raise a ton of money, and you don't really have many elected leaders beyond the most conservative members of the Wyoming House of Representatives, for example, who actually participate in party activities. But there is a lot of vitriol that we can see, and an anti-Cheney rally back in January, for instance, was one of the largest public protests in Wyoming since the days of the Tea Party. And I've been to numerous events of people planning to unseat her. GOP meetings are more packed than ever, and many new members of the party I've talked to specifically cite Cheney's vote as a reason for getting involved. So there is a lot of visible disdain toward our current representative around the state. Of course, you see the inverse as well. It doesn't really pay right now to vocally support Cheney. We had a very hard swing to the right in last year's primary elections, so a lot of electeds are very wary about what they say publicly, but they are quietly supportive of her. And we've seen from a lot of people that January 6th was a very visceral event for a lot of people, and we haven't really seen an unbiased survey of the public's opinion on that just yet.
Well, Nick, there are quite a few names already being floated as potential challengers to Congresswoman Cheney. Might this actually end up helping her in the long run?
Yeah, and I think that's on everyone's minds already. I mean, we even saw this back in January. Actually, Donald Trump Jr. Was lobbying for us to pass a runoff election bill, which has been a sitting issue for some time. Crowded Republican primaries are kind of a signature of Wyoming politics, given it's a Republican-dominated state and all the action is really on one side of the aisle. So you can pretty much predict the winner of elections here in the primaries, and people usually turn out in force for those. We can name the 2018 governor's race, for example, where Governor Mark Gordon escaped with just over 1/3 of the vote in the Republican primary, while his two closest finishers combined for more than 40%. The first time Cheney got in, that was, I think, a 9-way race, and she got through with less than half the vote. A number of her challengers combined for I think about 55% of that, her three closest challengers, I should say. We've seen that in Secretary of State's races. And I think the candidates themselves are trying to put pressure on the rest of the field to try and respond to that or recognize that if they want to get Cheney out, they have to consolidate. An internal poll by Chuck Gray, one of the candidates in this race earlier, presented scenarios for what it would look like in a 5-way race versus a 3-way race. And in all those scenarios, Cheney fares a lot better when we're looking at a more crowded field. But they're trying to make the argument that if I'm the candidate you pick, I'm going to pose the best chance of defeating Cheney. And I think every candidate is trying to do that right now, trying to convince voters that if they had an opportunity to go one-on-one against Cheney, they would come out on top.
And what are you seeing in terms of fundraising numbers?
Yeah, from a campaign finance standpoint, Cheney has frankly been killing it. For the last 2 quarters, she's set consecutive records of $1.3 million in quarter one, 1.8 in quarter two, which is a substantial improvement. If we're talking about the total amount of cash on hand, she actually has nearly 5 times the total cash on hand of all of her opponents combined. So we're looking at a pretty significant war chest here. That said, Cheney has a lot of support that a lot of candidates don't have. She still has some PAC support. And even though she was one of, I think, the top 10 members of the House in fundraising in regards to individual donations, people like Anthony Bouchard have done extremely well from a purely grassroots perspective. He's been up there. He's raised about $600,000 right now without relying on any political action committees whatsoever, primarily small donors from all areas of the country, and a campaign very much focused on social media. We have Darren Smith, of course, who is actually an alum of Pat Robertson's Christian Broadcasting Network, who had access to what appeared to be a very large network of deep-pocketed donors. He had fewer than 100 contributions, but among the challengers was the second best fundraiser just from an individual contribution standpoint. Of course, the person with the most cash on hand right now. Oh, sorry, I apologize.
No, I want to make sure that we also had time not just to talk about fundraising, but also some of that other soft power. Former President Trump's influence, his surrogate's influence in this race, including, as you mentioned, Donald Trump Jr., but also Congressman Matt Gaetz, Mark Meadows. And then obviously, Congresswoman Cheney's father is the former Vice President, Dick Cheney.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see that influence play out. And I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about how it will ultimately play out. Cheney's campaign right now is kind of in its infancy. Of course, she's the incumbent and has that advantage to her so far. So from a campaigning standpoint, she's been quiet so far, and so has Dick Cheney in that process. I don't think it's really time to roll them out yet, and we haven't really seen much more than visits to the Chamber of Commerce and local groups from Liz to really